Walk through any modern boat show and you'll feel it right away. The catamarans are getting all the attention. The wide decks, the flat floors, the fly bridges that look like rooftop bars. The monohull sitting quietly in the next slip looks almost old-fashioned by comparison. And yet, when you talk to the people who actually cross oceans, who keep boats for 20 years, who have been rolled in a gale and lived to talk about it, the conversation shifts. The fashionable answer and the serious answer are not the same answer. Here's what most buyers miss when they walk those docks. The monohull is not surviving in the market out of nostalgia. It's surviving because the physics keep rewarding it. One hull, one keel, one continuous structure. That sounds almost too simple to matter. In naval architecture, simplicity usually hides enormous strength. Every boat is a compromise. Speed, stability, space, comfort, cost, range, maintenance, load carrying, storm survival. You never maximize all of them at once. Design is really the art of deciding which compromises you can live with. The monohull answers that question in a very particular way. Instead of splitting buoyancy across two narrow hulls, it concentrates everything into one integrated body, one main load path, one underwater shape, one motion pattern. The moment you divide the boat into multiple hulls, you don't just gain beam and deck area, you create more wetted surface, more structural complexity, more wave interference, more torsional problems, more cost, and offshore, a very different kind of risk. Let's start with the thing every hull fights from the second it moves: drag. The first component is friction. Water sliding along the hull surface resists motion. The more wetted surface you carry, the more friction you create. And this is where the monohull already starts winning quietly. It carries its displacement in one continuous hull. A catamaran has to spread that same task across two separate hulls, which means more total surface in the water and more drag, especially at the low and moderate speeds where friction dominates. That is why, when most people are honest about their cruising speeds, the monohull often moves its weight more efficiently than the glossy brochures suggest. There's also wave-making resistance, which is where multi-hulls are supposed to win, and at high speed in clean conditions, they can. But the monohull has an advantage the brochures don't mention. It generates one clean wave system. A catamaran generates two, and those wave trains can interfere with each other. If the designer doesn't manage that interaction perfectly, the wake from one hull actually amplifies the drag of the other. The monohull doesn't have that problem. One hydrodynamic body, one flow problem to solve. That makes the hull more predictable across a wider range of conditions, which matters because the ocean is never a towing tank. You're dealing with chop, swell, quartering seas, a boat that's loaded differently this week than last. A hull that behaves consistently through all of that has real value. Which brings us to upwind performance, and this is where the monohull separates itself most clearly from a typical cruising catamaran. Sailing upwind isn't about raw boat speed, it's about velocity made good. How much progress you're actually making toward where you need to go. A boat that sails fast at a wide angle can still arrive later than a slower boat holding a tighter course. Monohulls are built to hold that tighter course. The reason is under the waterline. A proper monohull keel isn't just ballast. It's a high-aspect foil that resists leeway and generates hydrodynamic lift. When the sails push sideways, the keel pushes back. The boat converts more of that force into forward motion instead of sideways slip. Most cruising catamarans don't have that. To keep draft shallow for the Bahamas, the Keys, or a quiet anchorage in the Med, they use stubby mini-keels. That's wonderful when you want to nose up to a sandbar. It's not wonderful when you're trying to claw off a lee shore in 25 knots. The cat may look quick over the water and still make poor progress to windward because half the effort is sliding sideways. That's the difference between what sells at the dock and what matters at sea. Monohulls point higher, track better, and because their mass is centered around one keel, they tack with more authority. A wide catamaran has enormous rotational inertia. In heavy seas, some of them will get stuck in irons. A monohull will usually come through the wind and settle on the new tack without drama. And then there's something that doesn't show up on any spec sheet: feedback. A monohull talks to you. As the breeze builds, the boat heels. The helm loads up. The rudder speaks. You feel trim errors, imbalance, the moment a gust is one size too big for the sail plan. That feedback tells you when to reef, when to ease, when the groove is right. The monohull leaks information through its motion. A stiff catamaran doesn't because it refuses to heel. Loads build in the rig quietly, without the obvious physical warning a leaning boat gives you. That's one reason experienced multi-hull sailors reef early. The platform doesn't spill power the way a monohull does, just by tipping over a few more degrees. Now we have to talk about stability honestly, because this is where people get confused. At first glance, a catamaran looks more stable, and in one sense it absolutely is. Its wide beam gives it enormous initial stability. It takes serious force to start it heeling. That's why it feels planted in normal conditions. But ultimate stability is a different story, and offshore, ultimate stability is what counts. A ballasted monohull keeps its center of gravity low because of the keel. As the boat heels, the righting arm grows. Gravity pulls it back upright. Here's the number that matters. A well-designed monohull has a range of positive stability that often extends past 120 degrees, sometimes close to 150. That means even after a serious knockdown, even after being rolled, the boat still wants to come back. The keel is trying to save you. A catamaran resists capsize strongly at first, but once it passes its maximum righting angle, stability turns against you. Beyond that point, the multi-hull is stable upside down. It doesn't self-right. That's not a detail. That's a fundamental split in design philosophy. One boat heels more easily but recovers from catastrophe. The other resists heeling hard, but once the line is crossed, the failure is final. For anyone planning real offshore passages, that distinction matters more than almost anything else on the spec sheet. Because blue water design isn't really about what happens in normal weather, it's about what happens when the weather stops being polite. A breaking sea, a rogue wave, a violent knockdown at 3 in the morning with a tired crew. The ballasted monohull carries one enormous asset into that moment, a built-in path back to upright. The monohull bends before it breaks. At sea, that's everything. Motion is where the argument gets more complicated. At anchor in a calm bay, yes, the cat is more comfortable. It doesn't roll. That's one of the real reasons multi-hulls sell. But offshore, the story changes. A monohull's motion is more pendulum-like, slower, more predictable, more rhythmic. Many long-distance sailors actually find that easier to live with over a week at sea than the sharper, higher-frequency motion of a wide platform that follows every wave directly. And the cat has one specific offshore problem a monohull simply doesn't have: bridge deck slamming. When waves hit the underside of the structure between the hulls, the impact is loud, sudden, and exhausting. Designers reduce it with clearance and shaping, but they can't eliminate it. It's inherent to the geometry. The monohull has no bridge deck to be struck. Its single hull cuts through instead. That's why most serious offshore sailors still describe a good monohull as more comfortable when you're beating into real weather. Structurally, the monohull is also a cleaner engineering problem. Think of it as a single continuous beam. Loads travel through one hull shell, one deck, one framing system. A catamaran is multiple hulls tied together by transverse structure, and the sea almost never lifts both hulls the same way. One hull is on a crest while the other is in a trough. One side slams while the other is supported. Quartering seas twist the whole platform. Now the connecting structure has to resist warping and torsion that a monohull sidesteps by geometry alone. Catamarans can be built beautifully strong, but it takes more engineering, more material, more analysis, and more money. And the load paths get more complicated to inspect as the boat ages. Then we come to what most buyers eventually notice when the honeymoon is over: the money. A 40 to 45 foot monohull might sit between $200,000 and $500,000. A comparable catamaran can run from $400,000 to well over $1 million. That's not a premium, that's a completely different ownership category. And the reason is visible. One hull instead of two. One engine instead of two. Fewer duplicated systems. Less material. Less manufacturing complexity. You're simply building less boat. That difference echoes through everything that comes next. Maintenance on a monohull is mechanically simpler. One engine, one shaft, one rudder, one set of tanks. A cat usually means two of everything. Redundancy sounds great, and sometimes it is, but redundancy is never free. Someone pays for it, and someone maintains it, every single year. Insurance follows the same pattern: higher value, wider beam, different risk profile, higher premium. And then marina fees, where the cat's beam stops being charming and starts being a tax. Marinas were built around monohull proportions. In busy cruising grounds on either coast of the US, in the Caribbean, along the Mediterranean, the cat often gets charged 1.5 to 2 times the regular slip rate when it can find a slip at all. Haul-outs tell the same story. Many yards simply can't lift wide multi-hulls. Your service network shrinks. The monohull fits the world that already exists. The catamaran asks the world to adjust, and the world charges for the inconvenience. There's one more thing that experienced owners know and new buyers learn the hard way: load sensitivity. Catamarans look like they have endless storage, and people fill them. Tools, spares, water, fuel, toys, batteries, gear for the kids. Load a cat heavily and performance degrades quickly. Bridge deck clearance drops, slamming gets worse, speed falls, motion suffers. A monohull is much more forgiving. Add weight, yes, the boat sits deeper and changes a little, but the basic seakeeping stays intact. For self-sufficient voyaging, where the boat is never sailed empty, that forgiveness is a real advantage. Blue water boats carry water makers, storm sails, medical kits, chain, spare anchors, food for weeks. The monohull handles that reality without protest. Heavy weather tactics are the last place the monohull still has a clear edge. Heaving to, the classic storm tactic of balancing the boat against itself and letting it sit relatively calm while the crew rests, works better on a monohull. The deep keel, the lower windage, the balanced hull all let it settle into that posture. A wide, tall catamaran struggles to lock into the same attitude. It often has to keep running off instead, which demands more attention and carries its own risks. Sometimes survival isn't about pushing on, it's about pausing safely. The monohull gives you more options for that pause. So where does this leave us? The catamaran isn't a worse boat. For charter work, for coastal cruising in warm water, for families who prioritize flat living space over everything else, it earns its keep. But it was never trying to solve the same problem. The monohull is optimized to be a coherent, efficient, recoverable sailing vessel. A boat that carries its weight well, points high, warns you before it overloads, tolerates a proper cruising load, fits the infrastructure that already exists, costs less to buy, less to maintain, less to insure, less to haul. A boat that can heave too. A boat that comes back up after being knocked down. That is the real advantage of the monohull. Not that it wins every category, it doesn't. It's that its advantages line up exactly with the priorities that matter most when the sailing gets serious. Safety, efficiency, structural simplicity, upwind capability, offshore recoverability, and ownership costs that don't quietly eat you alive over 10 years. The monohull is the standard not because the industry forgot to innovate, but because the physics keep voting the same way. One hull, one keel, one continuous structure. When wind, water, cost, fatigue and distance all start adding up, that single hull still makes an extraordinarily strong case for itself. If you've owned a monohull for a long stretch, or made the move from one type to the other, I'd like to hear what actually changed your mind and what you'd do differently today. The comments on these videos are usually where the honest lessons live, not in the brochures. If you want more of these straight, practical breakdowns, subscribe and leave a like. That's what this channel is built for.